The 7,932nd meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is Non-proliferation, Democratic People's Republic of Korea. The agenda is adopted. I wish to warmly welcome the Secretary General, ministers, and other distinguished representatives present in the Security Council chamber. Your presence underscores the importance of the subject matter we will discuss today. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representative of the Republic of Korea to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. On behalf of the Council, I welcome His Excellency, Mr. Yoon Byung-se, Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Korea. Welcome. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of Item 2 of the agenda. I wish to draw the attention of Council members to document S/2017/337, a letter dated 18 of April 2017 from the Permanent Representative of the United States of America to the United Nations, addressed to the Secretary General, transmitting a concept paper on the item under consideration. I give the floor to the Secretary General, His Excellency, Mr. Antonio Guterres.
Thank you, Mr. President. And Mr. President, allow me to first thank the United States and to thank you personally for convening this meeting. The situation on the Korean Peninsula is one of the longest-standing and most serious issues before the United Nations. The Security Council first adopted the resolution on the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, DPRK, nuclear issue in 1993, when it urged the DPRK not to withdraw from the Treaty of Non-proliferation of nuclear weapons. 24 years later, and despite extensive efforts, the challenge has defied resolution. In response to the DPRK's accelerated nuclear and ballistic missile activities, the Security Council has adopted 2 sanctions resolutions and met 11 times in emergency consultations since January 2016. During this period, the DPRK conducted 2 nuclear tests, more than 30 launches using ballistic missile technology, and various other activities relating to the nuclear and ballistic missile programs. Its launches using ballistic missile technology have included tests of short, medium, intermediate range, and submarine-launched ballistic missiles, as well as the placement of a satellite in orbit. These tests and launches are clear violations of Security Council resolutions. And the absence of coordination and notifications in advance of these launches, other than the space launch of 7 February 2016, are also contrary to internationally accepted regulations and standards adopted by the International Maritime Organization and International Civil Aviation Organization. Aircraft and ships have been prevented from planning their routes to steer clear of these hazardous activities, and adjacent states have been prevented from promulgating danger, restricted or prohibited areas in the areas of responsibility. The International Atomic Energy Agency remains unable to access the DPRK to verify the status of its nuclear program. The agency continues to monitor developments through satellite imagery and has observed signatures consistent with the operation of the plutonium production reactor and the reported centrifuge enrichment facility. Commercial satellite imagery analysis has also indicated continued activity of the DPRK's nuclear test site, which is believed to be maintained in a state of readiness to conduct additional nuclear test explosions. The DPRK has increasingly stressed the importance of nuclear deterrence in its military doctrine. At the 7th Congress of the Workers' Party of Korea in March 2016, DPRK leader Kim Jong-un described the country as a responsible nuclear weapon state. More recently, in a statement in the United Nations Disarmament Commission on the 3rd of April 2017, While reaffirming its support for comprehensive and complete nuclear disarmament, the DPRK stated that, and I quote, "Going nuclear armed is the policy of our state," end of quote. The DPRK is the only country to have conducted nuclear tests this century. We must assume that, with each test or launch, the DPRK continues to make technological advances in its pursuit of a military nuclear capability. Mr. President, I condemned in the strongest terms the DPRK's repeated violations of the relevant Security Council resolutions. The DPRK's continued pursuit of its nuclear weapon and ballistic missile programs, in defiance of repeated demands by the Security Council to cease such activities, clearly threatens regional and international security and seriously undermines international disarmament and non-proliferation efforts. I'm alarmed by the risk of military escalation in the region, including by miscalculation or misunderstanding. And I'm particularly concerned by the possibility that efforts to offset destabilizing activities of the DPRK could also result in increased armed competition and tensions, further impeding the ability of the international community to maintain unity and achieve a peaceful solution. The onus is on the DPRK to comply with its international obligations. At the same time, the international community must also step up its efforts to manage and reduce tensions. The absence of communication channels with the DPRK could be dangerous. Armed conflict in Northeast Asia, which is home to 1/5 of the world's people and gross domestic product, would have global implications. We need to avoid miscalculation and misunderstanding. We need to act now to prevent conflict and achieve sustainable peace. This means the DPRK refraining from further testing, complying with the relevant Security Council resolutions, and exploring the resumption of dialogue. And this means reopening and strengthening communication channels, particularly military, to lower the risk of miscalculation or misunderstanding. This means all member states implementing relevant Security Council resolutions. I've taken note of the Security Council's commitment to a peaceful diplomatic and political solution to the situation, of efforts by Council members as well as other states to facilitate a peaceful and comprehensive solution through dialogue, and of the importance the Council has placed on working to reduce tensions. The Council has important tools at its disposal, from targeted sanctions to communication channels. As Secretary General, I committed to seeking peaceful and political solutions. I stand ready to assist in any way possible, but I would welcome guidance and assistance from the Security Council in this regard. Mr. President, I welcome the Council's understanding of the importance of the humanitarian imperatives of the present situation. On the 21st of March, we released the latest DPRK needs and priorities document. For this year, 13 United Nations agencies and international NGOs operating in the DPRK are calling for 114 million to meet the urgent needs of 13 million, especially vulnerable people, half of the country's population. The people of the DPRK need our generosity and help. I also call on the DPRK authorities to engage with United Nations human rights mechanisms and with the international community to address the grave human rights situation and improve the living conditions of its people. I therefore welcome the visit by the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the rights of persons with disabilities to the DPRK next week. As we discussed in this chamber on the 18th of April, improvement in human rights will not only protect the livelihoods and dignify the people in the DPRK, but also promote long-term security and stability in the region and beyond. I would like to conclude by underlining our collective priority for conflict prevention. We must remain committed to pursuing peaceful and diplomatic paths for a peaceful and denuclearized Korean Peninsula. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Secretary General, for that most helpful briefing. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as Secretary of State of the United States. And I thank you for the opportunity to address the Security Council. According to UN Security Council Resolution 2321, a stated objective of this Council is North Korea's abandonment of its nuclear weapons and ballistic missile programs. For the past 20 years, well-intentioned diplomatic efforts to halt these programs have failed. It is only by first dismantling them that there can be peace, stability, and economic prosperity for all of Northeast Asia. With each successive detonation and missile test, North Korea pushes Northeast Asia and the world closer to instability and broader conflict. The threat of a North Korean nuclear attack on Seoul or Tokyo is real, and it is likely only a matter of time before North Korea develops the capability to strike the U.S. mainland. Indeed, the DPRK has repeatedly claimed it plans to conduct such a strike. Given that rhetoric, the United States cannot idly stand by, nor can other members of this Council who are within striking distance of North Korean missiles. Having for years displayed a pattern of behavior that defies multiple UN Security Council resolutions, including 2321 and 2270, and erodes global progress on nuclear nonproliferation, there's no reason to think that North Korea will change its behavior under the current multilateral sanctions framework. For too long, the international community has been reactive in addressing North Korea. Those days must come to an end. Failing to act now on the most pressing security issue in the world may bring catastrophic consequences. We have said this before, and it bears repeating. The policy of strategic patience is over. Additional patience will only mean acceptance of a nuclear North Korea. The more we bide our time, the sooner we will run out of it. In light of the growing threat, the time has come for all of us to put new pressure on North Korea to abandon its dangerous path. I urge this Council to act before North Korea does. We must work together to adopt a new approach and impose increased diplomatic and economic pressures on the North Korean regime. The new campaign the United States is embarking on is driven by our own national security considerations, and it is welcomed by many nations who are concerned for their own security and question why North Korea clings to nuclear capabilities for which it has no need. Our goal is not regime change, nor do we desire to threaten the North Korean people or destabilize the Asia-Pacific region. Over the years, we have withdrawn our own nuclear weapons from South Korea and offered aid to North Korea as proof of our intent to de-escalate the situation and normalize relations. Since 1995, the United States has provided over $1.3 billion in aid to North Korea, and we look forward to resuming our contributions once the DPRK begins to dismantle its nuclear weapons and missile technology programs. The DPRK, for its own sake, must dismantle its nuclear missile programs if it wants to achieve the security, economic development, and international recognition that it seeks. North Korea must understand that respect will never follow recklessness. North Korea must take concrete steps to reduce the threat that its illegal weapons programs pose to the United States and our allies before we can even consider talks. I propose all nations take these three actions beginning today. First, we call on UN member states to fully implement the commitments they have made regarding North Korea. This includes all measures required in Resolutions 2321 and 2270. Those nations which have not fully enforced these resolutions fully discredit this body. Second, we call on countries to suspend or downgrade diplomatic relations with North Korea. North Korea exploits its diplomatic privileges to fund its illicit nuclear and missile technology programs, and constraining its diplomatic activity will cut off a flow of needed resources. In light of North Korea's recent actions, normal relations with the DPRK are simply not acceptable. Third, we must increase North Korea's financial isolation. We must levy new sanctions on DPRK entities and individuals supporting its weapons and missile programs and tighten those that are already in place. The United States also would much prefer countries and people in question to own up to their lapses and correct their behavior themselves. but we will not hesitate to sanction third country entities and individuals supporting the DPRK's illegal activities. We must bring maximum economic pressure by severing trade relationships that directly fund the DPRK's nuclear and missile program. I call on the international community to suspend the flow of North Korean guest workers and to impose bans on North Korean imports, especially coal. We must all do our share, but China, accounting for 90% of North Korean trade, China alone has economic leverage over Pyongyang that is unique, and its role is therefore particularly important. The U.S. and China have held very productive exchanges on this issue, and we look forward to further actions that build on what China has already done. Lastly, as we have said before, all options for responding to future provocation must remain on the table. Diplomatic and financial levers of power will be backed up by a willingness to counteract North Korean aggression with military action, if necessary. We much prefer a negotiated solution to this problem, but we are committed to defending ourselves and our allies against North Korean aggression. This new pressure campaign will be swiftly implemented and painful to North Korean interest. I realize some nations for which a relationship with North Korea has been in some ways a net positive may be disinclined to implement the measures of pressure on North Korea. But the catastrophic effects of a North Korean nuclear strike outweigh any economic benefits. We must be willing to face the hard truths and make hard choices right now to prevent disastrous outcomes in the future. Business as usual is not an option. There's also a moral dimension to this problem. Countries must know by now that helping the North Korean regime means enabling cruelty and suffering. North Korea feeds billions of dollars into a nuclear program it does not need while its own people starve. The regime's pursuit of nuclear weapons does not serve its own national security or the well-being of a people trapped in tyranny. I ask the community of nations to help us preserve security and protect human dignity. In one of my first trips as America's Secretary of State, I looked across the DMZ at the haunted land of North Korea. Beyond the border is a nation of sorrow, frozen in time. While the world sees the gleaming buildings of Pyongyang, the blight of oppression and starvation has swept this land for over 60 years. But even though the present condition of that country is bleak, the United States believes in a future for North Korea. These first steps toward a more hopeful future will happen most quickly if other stakeholders in the region and the global security join us. For years, North Korea has been dictating the terms of its dangerous course of action. It is time for us to retake control of the situation. We ask the members of this Council and all other partners to implement a new strategy to denuclearize North Korea. Thank you. I resume my function now as President of the Council. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Fumio Kishida, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Japan.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to begin by expressing my sincere appreciation to you for convening this timely meeting on the denuclearization of North Korea. I would also like to thank Secretary General Guterres for his informative briefing. Mr. President, the threat posed by North Korea's nuclear and ballistic missile development has reached a new level. Since January 2016 alone, it has conducted 2 nuclear tests and at least 30 ballistic missile launches. This threat is not just hypothetical. For ordinary citizens, it is only too real. On 6th of March, North Korea launched 4 ballistic missiles, 3 of which landed within Japan's exclusive economic zone. this was no advance notice, and the consequence of these reckless launches could have been catastrophic for innocent fishing boats, sea vessels, and aircrafts. These launches are intentionally meant to be a provocation, as evidenced by North Korea media reports, which states that the North Korean units responsible for striking U.S. bases in Japan in contingencies were involved. It is therefore increasingly important for countries in the region to strengthen deterrence to ensure these peace and security. Mr. President, now is good time to recall the commitments North Korea has made on denuclearization in the past. In 2005, North Korea, together with China, Japan, the Republic of Korea, the Russian Federation, and the United States, quote, unanimously reaffirmed that the goal of the six-party talks in the verifiable denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula in peaceful manner, end of quote, in six-party talks joint statement. All parties expect North Korea remain commitment to this position. There is no doubt that dialogue is necessary to achieve the peaceful denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. However, under the current situation, where North Korea continues to advance its nuclear and ballistic missile programs, meaningful dialogue is clearly not possible. In order to bring North Korea back to the negotiating table, the international community must send a strong message that provocation comes at a high price and that no bright future awaits North Korea without its denuclearization. With this in mind, Japan calls on all member states to increase pressure on North Korea through rigorous and thorough implementation of relevant Security Council resolutions. Japan has been implementing additional measures against North Korea, which go beyond the obligations under the Security Council resolutions to severely restrict the flow of people, goods, and funds, including the total ban of exports and imports. Japan has also actively assisted capacity building for ASEAN countries in order to enhance the effectiveness of the Security Council resolution. No state should allow itself to become a loophole in the North Korea sanctions regime. Japan calls on all member states which have not already done so to submit national implementation reports to the North Korea sanctions committees as required by Security Council resolution. Any further provocation, including nuclear tests, should be met promptly by an even more stringent resolution by Security Council. Mr. President, North Korea has defiantly dismissed Security Council resolution as illegal, and so we refuse to be bound by these obligations. This has real humanitarian consequences. The regime's pursuit of nuclear weapons and ballistic missile development comes at the expense of the welfare and basic needs of the people in North Korea. These people include international abductees. In the past, North Korean agents infiltrated Japan and abducted a number of Japanese citizens, including a girl as young as 13 years old. Abductees' futures have been stolen and their families torn apart. Japan attaches the utmost importance to the abductions issue, which undermines the sovereignty of Japan and casts fear over the lives of our citizens. Victims of abduction are not limited to Japanese citizens. This is a universal issue facing the international community and a violation of fundamental human rights. In urging North Korea to take concrete action on this issue, Japan asks for the international community's support and understanding. Mr. President, regrettably, the possibility of further provocations by North Korea is high. The Council must send a clear message that such actions will only lead to more rigorous responses from international community. Japan strongly urged North Korea to demonstrate its seriousness as well as concrete actions on denuclearization. Japan looks forward to continuing to work closely with all of our colleagues here today on this matter. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Kishida for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Mansour Ndiaye, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Senegalese abroad of Senegal.
Merci bien, Monsieur le Secrétaire.
Thank you, Secretary of State, President of the Security Council, the Secretary General of the United Nations, colleagues, ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, Mr. President, I would like to thank you for having taken the initiative to organize this debate on the important issue of nuclear non-proliferation. I would also like to thank Mr. Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, whose statement has made it possible to enlighten our work and to enrich our discussion. Sir, the question of nuclear disarmament is among the global priorities, as we see in the first resolution adopted in January 1946 of the United Nations General Assembly, which aimed to eradicate all atomic bombs. Convinced of the risk that it poses due to the risk for humankind, our country has always argued in favor of the total eradication of nuclear activities for military purposes, and not only its simple reduction. Indeed, the total eradication is the only way of preserving the world and protecting it from the devastation that would stem from the use of nuclear weapons. Only this would be in a position to guarantee the survival of our planet and to assure the future of present and future generations, allowing them not to live with the fear of an explosion of an atomic bomb, but rather in a world free from the specter of thermonuclear disaster. Along with these clearly identified threats, sir, we can add as well the increase in the risk of proliferation linked to non-state actors due to the rise of terrorism, as well as the new danger posed by the wrongful use of rapid progress in science, technology, and international trade. It's in the light of all these challenges that my country has condemned with the greatest firmness the nuclear tests carried out by the DPRK in January 2016, as well as the different ballistic missile launches, which are serious violations of that country's international obligations under resolutions 1718 of 2006, 1874 of 2009, 2087 of 2013, 2094 of 2013, 2270 of 2016, and 2321 of the Security Council. These actions clearly reveal the pursuit by DPRK of its programs in the area of nuclear weapons and missile production, and its determination to acquire a nuclear force. This is not only a threat for the population on the peninsula and in the region, but also a grave violation of the non-proliferation regime. Senegal urgently calls upon the DPRK to respect its international obligations. Mr. President, in 2016, the Security Council adopted unanimously two resolutions, 2270 of the 2nd of March and 2321 of the 30th of November, substantially strengthening the sanctions already in effect against Pyongyang. However, we are forced to acknowledge that these measures, along with those imposed unilaterally by certain countries, have not always managed to make the country come back to its senses and to abandon its nuclear military ambition. In actual fact, all these sanctions have not prevented the gradual enhancement and expansion of the nuclear capabilities as well as ballistic missiles in North Korea, which continues to flagrantly violate the resolutions and the repeated requests of the Security Council. Indeed, Senegal has ratified the main instruments that lie at the basis of the non-proliferation regime, and we also respect the obligations of states stemming from Resolution 1540 of the Security Council, and today we're celebrating its 13th anniversary. Similarly, Senegal presented its report on the implementation of the provisions of resolutions 1718, 1874, and 2094 and 2270. My country is currently finalizing its report on resolution 2321, which we will send to the chairman of the 1718 committee. Sir, today it's important to stress that North Korea respects its obligations. And once again, Mr. Chairman, before concluding my statement, I'd like to say how deeply grateful we are for your commitment and that of your country to contribute through dialogue and through diplomatic consultation, to contribute to the search for a negotiated political solution to the crises which disrupt the course of world affairs. My country and its President Macky Sall, welcome your efforts and your commitment to together find the historic commitment which is necessary to put an end to the serious threat posed by the actions of the DPRK. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Ndai for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Yang Yi, Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Mr. President, the continued escalation of tensions on the Korean Peninsula in the recent period has caused widespread concerns and worries of the international community. If the issue of the peninsula fails to be put under effective control, and in the case of unexpected events, the situation is highly likely to take a drastic turn for the worse and spiral out of control. And there is no lack of such painful lessons in history, and we must put it on high alert. In view of this, China believes today's meeting of the Council is necessary. And we thank Secretary General Guterres for his briefing to the Council. We hope the parties could form consensus on more strictly and fully implementing DPRK-related Security Council resolutions, intensifying efforts to promote peace talks, and bringing the nuclear issue on the Korean Peninsula back to the track of a negotiated solution. China's position regarding the nuclear issue on the peninsula is clear-cut. No matter how the situation may change, we must stick to the following two basic directions. First, we must stay committed to the goal of denuclearization. Denuclearization is the basic precondition for long-term peace and stability on the peninsula, and what we must accomplish to safeguard the international nuclear non-proliferation regime. No matter what happens, we should never waver in our commitment to this goal. To this end, China's position of opposing the DPRK's research, development, and possession of nuclear weapons remains rock firm. We urge the DPRK to stop its nuclear and missile development activities, come back to its commitment of denuclearization, and honor its denuclearization obligations. Meanwhile, we also call on other parties concerned to demonstrate political wisdom, make a political decision, and work constructively together toward the denuclearization of the peninsula. Second, we must stay committed to the path of dialogue and negotiation. The use of force does not solve differences and will only lead to bigger disasters. As the only way out, dialogue and negotiation also represent the sensible choice for all parties. Our past experience of resolving the nuclear issue on the peninsula shows that whenever dialogue and negotiation were going, the situation on the peninsula would maintain basic stability and efforts towards denuclearization could make progress. During the 5 years between 2003 and 2007, when the parties were engaged in dialogue and negotiation, 3 joint documents were adopted. In particular, the September 19th joint statement in 2005 set out the roadmap for the DPRK's abandonment of all nuclear programs and the realization of peace on the peninsula. Even today, the joint statement still carries major positive significance and has been reaffirmed and acknowledged by all DPRK-related resolutions of the Council. Since dialogue and negotiation came to a halt in 2008, the situation on the peninsula has gradually gone out of control, and the DPRK has accelerated its nuclear and missile development process and successfully conducted 4 nuclear tests and dozens of missile launches. Therefore, we hope all parties could dedicate greater efforts to seeking a political settlement through dialogue and consultation as required by the Security Council resolutions. Mr. President, China is not a focal point of the problem on the peninsula, and the key to solving the nuclear issue on the peninsula does not lie in the hands of the Chinese side. That said, as a close neighbor to the peninsula and with a responsible attitude for peace and stability on the peninsula and in the region, China has over the years made unremitting efforts and played a unique role in promoting a negotiated solution of the issue. It is through China's efforts and the support of all parties that the 3-party talks on the peninsula nuclear issue was expanded to 6-party talks. Under the current circumstances, China is still prepared to work with all parties to make new contribution to the resolution of the nuclear issue on the peninsula. In view of the recent developments on the peninsula, China has put forward the proposal of suspension for suspension, which builds on the dual-track approach we proposed earlier. The dual-track approach aims to promote parallel progress in the denuclearization of the peninsula and the establishment of a peace mechanism on the peninsula in a synchronized and reciprocal manner, ultimately achieving both goals together. The suspension for suspension proposal, which calls for the suspension of nuclear and missile activities by the DPRK and the suspension of large-scale military exercises by the US and the ROK, seeks to bring the 2 sides back to the negotiation table, thus initiating the first step of the dual-track approach, or rather the initial stage of this program. China's above-mentioned proposals have taken into consideration both the short-term and long-term goals and made them complementary to each other. While they are designed to address the most pressing concerns of the parties, they also pave the way towards denuclearization. They are consistent with the requirement of the Council resolutions and the fundamental interests of all parties, including the US and the DPRK. The proposals are objective, impartial, reasonable, and practical, and are gaining understanding and support from more and more countries. Of course, we also know that some countries may still have doubts of sorts. The point I want to make is the most urgent task now is to stop the DPRK's nuclear and missile development. To achieve this, it is necessary to put aside the debate over who should take the first step and stop arguing who is right and who is wrong. Rather, we should start from the low-hanging fruits, remove the flashpoints endangering peace on the peninsula, and create conditions for stability in the region. I also want to stress here that the state of affairs of the peninsula issue is not caused by any single party. Nor is it realistic to ask any party alone to take up all the responsibilities for resolving the issue. As President Xi Jinping said, only with all relevant parties shouldering their due responsibilities and meeting each other halfway will there be an early solution to the nuclear issue on the peninsula. We call upon all parties, especially those directly concerned on the issue, namely the DPRK and the US, to demonstrate sincerity for dialogue and restart the dialogue process. We also look to the Council to build further consensus and speak with a more united voice. In the meantime, China will be open to all useful proposals from the parties. All ideas conducive to resuming dialogue and negotiation, achieving denuclearization, and maintaining peace and stability on the peninsula can be explored in our discussion. Colleagues, as we meet for this special session, China calls upon all parties to make concerted efforts to address two urgent tasks. First, cooling down temperature on the peninsula as quickly as possible. Given the grave situation on the peninsula, China strongly urges all parties to remain calm and exercise restraint and avoid provocative rhetorics or actions that would lead to miscalculation. What I want to stress is that there is and should be no double standard on this issue. While we demand the DPRK to observe the Council's resolutions and stop advancing its nuclear and missile development, we also demand the US, the ROK, and other parties to refrain from conducting or even expanding military exercises and development against the DPRK. Second, all parties should comprehensively appreciate and fully implement DPRK-related Security Council resolutions. In addition to introducing sanctions under DPRK, the resolutions adopted to date also ask for the resumption of the six-party talks, avoidance of escalating tensions, and a commitment to dialogue. In other words, imposing sanctions and promoting talks are both efforts to implement these Council resolutions. We cannot choose one over the other. We'll only implement what we see fit. As a response to the accelerated progress of DPRK's nuclear and missile development, the international community needs to step up non-proliferation efforts. Meanwhile, to prevent the escalation of tension on the peninsula, it is also necessary for parties to step up the efforts of promoting peace talks. These two stepping ups can help promote a peaceful settlement of the nuclear issue on the peninsula. The Chinese word for crisis contains two characters, which respectively means danger and opportunity. It shows that in China's view, now is the time to seriously consider resuming talks. Before I conclude, I want to reiterate China's firm opposition against the U.S. deployment of THAAD anti-missile system in the ROK. It is a move that seriously undermines the strategic security of China and other countries in the region and damages the trust and the cooperation amongst the parties on the peninsula issue. It is detrimental to achieving denuclearization and maintaining long-term stability on the peninsula. China once again urges relevant parties to immediately stop the deployment process. Let us make joint efforts to promote denuclearization and uphold peace on the peninsula on the basis of mutual respect and mutual trust. Thank you, Mr. President.
Let's see Mr. Wong, Minister of Foreign Affairs, for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Boris Johnson, Secretary of State for Foreign and Commonwealth Affairs of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Mr. President. The United Nations Charter defines the supreme task of this Council as the maintenance of peace and international security. There could hardly be a clearer threat to world peace, more demanding of a unified response than the activities of one member of the United Nations, North Korea, breaking its treaty obligations, ignoring the will of this Council, and making blood-curdling threats to inflict grievous harm on peoples of other countries. For decades, North Korea has doggedly pursued the means to act on these threats. In a nation whose entire GDP is about $25 billion, and where its people have over recent decades been exposed to terrible suffering, reduced to eating leaves and the bark of trees, the Pyongyang regime has devoted its energies to developing nuclear weapons and the missiles to convey them. Last year alone, North Korea tested 2 nuclear devices and more than 24 ballistic missiles. This year, we've witnessed more missile tests, and I remind the Council that every one of those tests breaks 7 UN resolutions stretching back to Resolution 1695 passed unanimously in 2006. So we should reject, I'm afraid, we should reject any claims of moral equivalence between North Korea's actions and the defensive and precautionary measures of other nations. The second, the latter, are legitimate, the first are not. And in spite of the strenuous efforts of some to obscure that distinction cannot be ignored or elided. So the United Kingdom believes it is vital for this Council to stand ready to take further significant measures to bring about a peaceful resolution. And sooner or later, the North Korean leadership must realize that their isolation not only holds back their own people, if the regime really cares about their own people, but also weakens their own grip on power. This Council must be united in its demand that the present course cannot continue. And Britain is proud today to have joined its allies to lead the enforcement of sanctions and seek a peaceful solution. We urge other partners with direct influence on North Korea to use their leverage to the full, with the aim of easing tensions and ensuring compliance with the expressed will of the UN. There is a vital role for China and Russia, both of whom are neighbors of North Korea with influence on Pyongyang and as permanent members of this Council. Special responsibility they have for preserving international peace and security. The UK calls on Russia and China and other member states to use whatever influence they possess to restrain North Korea and guide its leaders towards a peaceful settlement. Last year, this Council decided to toughen sanctions on North Korea, including by restricting the regime's access to foreign currency. But the UN panel of experts has shown that not every member state is fully enforcing those resolutions. Most members of the UN have yet to obey the requirement in Resolution 2270 to submit a national report on their implementation of sanctions. The UK believes that all member states should reaffirm their commitment to enforcing UN sanctions against North Korea. We also have no doubt that negotiations must at some point form part of the solution. But first, it is reasonable to expect North Korea to make verifiable progress towards meeting its obligations to denuclearize the Korean Peninsula. For as long as Pyongyang continues to defy this Council, the conditions will not be helpful for resuming the six-party talks or negotiations in any other format. While the most pressing threat is North Korea's ballistic missile and nuclear ambitions, we must never forget the horrifying abuse the regime metes out to its own people, as documented in the UN Commission of Inquiry in 2014. This Council has discussed human rights in North Korea on previous occasions, and there should be no reticence about doing so. The UK fully supports the work of the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in North Korea and the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, both of whom perform the crucial task of investigating and recording these violations. Britain stands alongside our allies in making clear that North Korea must obey the UN and halt its nuclear weapons and ballistic missile programs. Disarming in a complete, verifiable, and irreversible manner. Only then can this Council be assured of the peace and security of the region. And only then can the people of North Korea have the chance of a better future. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Johnson for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Workney Gebeyahu, Minister of Foreign Affairs for Ethiopia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, we thank the U.S. Presidency for organizing this high-level briefing session on an issue which has serious implications for regional and international peace and security. We express appreciation to you, Mr. Secretary, for presiding over this important meeting. We also thank the Secretary General for his useful briefing. We are indeed deeply concerned by the extremely tense situation prevailing in the Korean Peninsula. No stone should be left unturned to de-escalate the situation. There is a real danger that it could get out of hand. This should never be allowed to happen and for the situation to spiral out of control. Mr. President, the activities of the DPRK is no doubt extremely dangerous. Ethiopia joins other members in once again reiterating its strong condemnation of the latest launches of ballistic missiles by the DPRK in violation of the numerous resolutions adopted by the Council. We need to find a lasting and comprehensive political and diplomatic solution to this long-standing issue through dialogue has never been more urgent than today. In this regard, DPRK's return to its international commitments on denuclearization and its full compliance with the relevant resolutions of the Security Council is indeed indispensable. This no doubt would pave the way for a peaceful and comprehensive solution through dialogue. The DPRK has responsibility to do this. In the meantime, it is important to reduce the tension in the Korean Peninsula to ensure that matters would not go out of hand by accident. But the DPRK has to use the opportunity to avert what otherwise could be a slide into war from which no one would benefit. Mr. President, the full implementation by member states of the relevant Security Council resolution on the DPRK is also necessary. We believe the recent outreach activity by the chair of the 1718 committee with different regional groups will contribute in the implementation of the sanctions regime against the DPRK. We, on our part, have taken all necessary measures to ensure that Ethiopia is in full compliance with all that is called for by the relevant Council resolutions imposing sanctions on the DPRK. We will continue to do so to meet our obligation in this regard. I wish to conclude by reaffirming our commitment to fulfill our obligations and continue to engage constructively with the panel, which is tasked with the responsibility of monitoring the implementation of the sanctions regime imposed on the DPRK. We look forward to the restoration of reliable peace and security in the Korean Peninsula. We all need that. I thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Gebeyahu for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Kairat Abragnamov, Minister for Foreign Affairs, Kazakhstan.
Mr. President, distinguished excellencies and colleagues, I would like to thank His Excellency Secretary of State Tillerson for convening this debate on DPRK, a topic that unfortunately becomes highly relevant in the light of recent events. For Kazakhstan, its nation and leadership, nuclear disarmament, non-proliferation and nuclear security have been the essential priorities of our national policy since our independence. From the time of joining the United Nations in March 1992, my country has worked with steadfast determination to promote disarmament and non-proliferation globally. That's why I hope today's meeting will help the Council to come up with a collective multilateral action to bring peace to the Korean Peninsula and find ways to its denuclearization. My country strongly believes that the Security Council, as the single body entrusted to maintain international peace and security, should preserve its unity at this critical stage. And in this regard, we welcome the Council's recent statement stressing the importance of working to reduce tensions in the Korean Peninsula and beyond. We are all pained to see how the situation in and around the Korean Peninsula has worsened with the passage of time, resulting in a complete impasse. It was worrisome that the DPRK continues to launch ballistic missiles and conduct nuclear tests in flagrant violation of all relevant UN Security Council resolutions. As the co-chair of the 9th Conference on Facilitating the Entry into Force of the CTBT and the chairman of the Hague Code of Conduct Against Ballistic Missile Proliferation, my country applies every effort to promote the nuclear non-proliferation process. 5 nuclear tests have been conducted so far, and a 6th could be around the corner if we do not take real action aimed at diffusing tensions. Therefore, we urge DPRK to refrain from actions and have a negative impact on the nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation process and pose a threat to both regional and global security. We call on all member states to strictly observe the sanctions regime put in place under the all relevant Security Council resolutions aimed at the denuclearization of DPRK and on CTBT, which calls upon all states to refrain from conducting any nuclear weapon test explosions or any other nuclear explosion and to maintain their moratoria in this regard. And Kazakhstan co-sponsored resolutions 20-70, 2310 and 2321. The denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula is a key element in preserving broader security across Asia and Central Asia. Possession of nuclear arms by the North Korean regime will create a precedent that will undoubtedly lead to an escalation of the regional arms race, and given the temptation, might naturally cause further proliferation to balance DPRK's nuclear threat. We would like to give a reminder that the principal position of Kazakhstan is not only the most severe condemnation of the use of WMD by any party, but also the resolution of conflicts through dialogue and negotiations. Allow me to inform you that Kazakhstan is still struggling with the devastating legacy of the Cold War. This is why the closure of the second largest nuclear test site and the announcement of the 4th largest nuclear arsenal in the world remains one of the proudest achievements of my country. Soon, together with our co-sponsors, we are going to launch first ever IAEA low-enriched uranium bank in Kazakhstan. As a non-permanent member of this august body, we bring the same passionate commitment to nuclear non-proliferation as one of our firm principles, goals, and priorities of our work as envisioned by my President Nursultan Nazarbayev of Kazakhstan in his address at the 70th session of UN General Assembly and his manifesto, The World, the 21st Century. I believe that all of the above gives Kazakhstan a strong moral right to call upon all member states and first and foremost DPRK to apply every effort in resolving this troublesome situation. Achieving this goal requires above all intensified dialogue between all stakeholders in the regional and global security, and my country is ready to contribute to that end. My country's non-nuclear status is the most convincing example that non-nuclear way of state development is the only promising one. We call on the DPRK to opt for the same choice. It has been proven that there is no situation for which there is no peaceful solution, and North Korea is no exception. As an example, in 2013, Kazakhstan's status as a trusted mediator allowed to facilitate the talks on Iranian nuclear program, which consequently contributed to the resumption of negotiations of the P5+1 and Iran. We are convinced that there is no other option but collective commitment to international obligations taken in accordance with Security Council resolutions. Kazakhstan believes that this is the right time and is ready to work with all member states toward eliminating the nuclear threat for the sake of our world. Complete nuclear disarmament and the abandonment of the DPRK's nuclear ambitions could be ensured by truce backed by permanent members of the Security Council, ensuring the political and military stability on the peninsula. Close engagement with the Asia-Pacific community will bring DPRK significant benefits for choosing the path of peaceful coexistence. Such approach, combined with a comprehensive and holistic regional strategy, will ensure stability for the country, peninsula, and the wider sub-region. We call upon all parties, all relevant stakeholders, and all member states to take balanced and thoughtful actions that would not lead to irreversible consequences. We call on all parties concerned to refrain from actions that could increase the risks of a military escalation and further tensions in the region. I thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Agramanov for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Gennady Gotlyov, Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, Russian Federation.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ladies and gentlemen, it is without question that what we're living through in present is one of the more acute and dramatic phases in the situation in the Korean Peninsula. Without exaggeration, one could say that peace in the region recently underwent serious test, and the threat of this confrontation moving into a hot phase was as high as possible then, and it remains today. The combative rhetoric coupled with reckless muscle flexing has led to the situation where the whole world is seriously now wondering whether there's going to be a war or not. As is well known, under the conditions of such tension, one ill-thought-out or a misinterpreted step could lead to the most frightening and lamentable consequences. In Russia, we are viewing the dangerous development of the situation in the region with alarm. We are ourselves part of the region. Of course, we are united in condemning the provocative nuclear missile activity by Pyongyang. In the past year and a half, it has taken on a very dangerous dynamic. We do understand very well the feelings of our neighbors when another rocket with a missile without a notification is being launched from North Korea territory, and therefore subjects the lives of people and sea and aviation transport to dangerous risks. We do not accept this activity by DPRK, and this is confirmed by our support to sanctioned resolutions issued by Security Council, namely Resolutions 2217, 2321. We call upon the North Korean authorities to end their banned programs and return to the non-proliferation regime and the IAEA verification. At the same time, everyone should be clear that the DPRK will probably not give up on the nuclear weapons for as long as they understand there's direct threat to their security. And that is exactly how the North Koreans view the regular, large-scale maneuvers and exercises by the United States and their neighbors in the region. And that's how they view the American Navy squadron into the region this month. An additional destabilizing factor in the region is what was passed in Washington and Seoul last year. This was done in the line of the wrong logic of creating a global anti-missile defense. The decision was to place on the territory of the Republic of Korea elements of the American anti-missile defense system, THAAD. We have said on many occasions that this step, to put it mildly, will not be viewed with enthusiasm by Pyongyang, but it also undermines the existing military balance in the region and therefore brings into question the security of neighboring states. We're not the only ones who view this in a very negative way. We call upon, once again, the United States and the Republic of Korea to review the desirability of such a step and call upon other members in the region to resist the temptation to become involved in such destabilizing efforts. Now, as regards the international sanctions against the DPRK, here, once again, we would like to say that we're committed to their implementation. At the same time, such measures should not become a goal in itself. They should rather be an instrument helping to involve this country in constructive negotiations on existing issues. Resolving the nuclear issue of the Korean Peninsula through sanctions and pressure on Pyongyang alone is not possible. Sanctions should not be used to either economically suffocate the DPRK, nor should they be used to worsen the humanitarian situation in the country. This particularly applies to the illegitimate, one-sided, unilateral restrictions which hit civilian sectors which are not related to the missile nuclear programs of the country. Such sanctions are the reasons for a serious deterioration of the living conditions of the North Koreans. And by the way, this is something that that we have the most recent report of the Office of the Coordination for Humanitarian Affairs. They are justifiably very alarmed by this. Let us also accept that basically the humanitarian exemptions provided for in the sanctions regimes of the Council do not work. Because of the ban on correspondent relations with the DPRK, because of that, it had become impossible to purchase goods and foodstuffs abroad necessary for the economy. Because of the way the banking system in DPRK works, it is very difficult to obtain funding for those UN humanitarian agencies which are still yet working in the country. Because it's not possible to replenish their foreign currency reserves because of existing restrictions, because of that, Pyongyang could find itself in a situation where physically impossible for them to give to the UN those funds which are to be channeled to them with the permission of the Committee on this banking issue. At another point is the situation as regards the diplomatic missions in Pyongyang. We should not allow a situation wherein they continue to find it difficult to work, and this is because of the restrictions placed on the country. We have raised this issue on many an occasion at meetings of the Sanctions Committee, but because there is an obstructionist position taken by individual members, the situation haven't budged an inch. Madam President, Mr. President, of course, the DPRK is conducting itself in an inappropriate way. It refuses to abide by the laws of the international community, which we have contained in the Security Council resolutions. At the same time, options of using force are completely unacceptable and can lead to catastrophic consequences to the Korean Peninsula and to the region of Northeast Asia as a whole. Our choice should be in favor of using our diplomatic tools to the maximum extent possible. In current conditions, all countries and parties involved should display calm and restraint and not undertake steps which could lead to the escalation of tension. We need to view the settlement of the situation in the context of the whole gamut of issues amongst parties and thus create the conditions to denuclearize the DPRK. And this is impossible without normalizing the general military and political situation, without refusing to build up on military infrastructure, without scaling down the maneuvers, without building trust among states in the region. We are convinced that there is no alternative to the political settlement of the nuclear issue of the Korean Peninsula on the basis of the joint statement issued by the participants of the six-party talks dated 19th September 2005. The Chinese proposals are in the same vein when they talk about suspension for suspension, and parallel moves. These ideas merit serious attention as they could be a starting point for us to get out of the current impasse and renew the negotiating process. We need to find channels of communication with the DPRK leadership and lead them to a substantive dialogue on nuclear and missile issues. As recent events have shown, under no circumstances can we allow the situation in the region to develop on its own. And as the saying goes, even poor peace is better than a good row. And in this regard, we are ready for closer cooperation with all partners in order to, as quickly as possible, resolve the nuclear and other issues in the Korea Peninsula through the only means possible, namely political and diplomatic means, through mutually respectful dialogue and mutual taking into account of interests and concerns. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Gottlieb for his statement. I now give the floor to Her Excellency Ms. Annika Suder, Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs of Sweden.
Thank you, Mr. President. First, let me express my gratitude to you and the United States Presidency of the Security Council for convening this very timely and important meeting. And I do thank the Secretary General for his briefing. The situation on the Korean Peninsula, particularly the DPRK's pursuit of nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles, is of great concern for the region and for our world more broadly. Tensions have risen in recent months, and the potential for mistakes, misunderstandings, and miscalculations is high. For this reason, it is important that this Council sees its opportunity to reflect on how tensions can be reduced and how this Council can facilitate a comprehensive solution to the situation. Mr. President, despite repeated unanimous condemnations by the Security Council and the adoption of a number of UNSC resolutions, leading actually to the most rigorous sanctions regime under the UN system, the DPRK persists in accelerating its nuclear weapons and ballistic missile program. In doing so, the DPRK continues to show blatant disregard for its international obligations, and it continues to threaten international peace and security. Its actions are incompatible with the existing global norm against nuclear testing, embodied in the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, and they go against non-proliferation work. Therefore, we call on the DPRK to take immediate steps towards a complete, verifiable, and irreversible dismantlement of its nuclear weapons and its missile program. This will help pave the way for peaceful and prosperous development on the Korean Peninsula. In addition, it is clear that there is a need for a regional security arrangement in the medium term to be able to realize this goal in full. Meanwhile, sanctions must be duly implemented to have the desired effect. This is also a matter of credibility for the entire UN system. Yet, the implementation of the sanctions against the DPRK remains insufficient and highly inconsistent, as highlighted in the latest report of the panel of experts to the Sanctions Committee. The recommendations provided by the panel must be followed up, and there is a need for a stronger political commitment by all UN members in this regard. We need additional capacity at all levels to ensure better compliance with the letter and the spirit of the resolutions adopted by this Council. But sanctions alone will not solve the situation on the Korean Peninsula. Now, diplomacy is crucial. Intensified and creative diplomatic efforts are urgently needed to prepare for a peaceful, diplomatic, and comprehensive solution. The press statement in response to the latest ballistic missile launch, that statement confirms the continued commitment of this Council to dialogue. The situation must be approached without prejudice, and we must be prepared to consider both new and previous proposals and agreements. Sweden is ready to do its part to fulfill this goal. Sweden and our embassy in Pyongyang is the protecting power of US interests in DPRK and also for Canada and Australia. We're also a member of the Neutral Nations Supervisory Commission, NNSC, and we, in this context, strongly encourage the DPRK to resume contact and cooperation with that commission at the border station in Panmunjom. This could also contribute to reducing tensions and increase trust and transparency. Mr. President, I would also, like others, like to take this opportunity to draw attention to the extremely worrying human rights situation and precarious humanitarian conditions in the DPRK. It is the duty of all of us to continue to highlight the atrocities being committed by the regime against its own people, and the international community should continue to pursue accountability for these crimes. But we should also look to the humanitarian situation of the people of the DPRK to avoid increased suffering as we implement the sanctions. Mr. President, the pursuit of weapons of mass destruction represents one of the gravest threats to international peace and security. Preventing their development and use is a crucial responsibility of this Council. There is no military solution to the situation in the Korean Peninsula, and we again call on the DPRK to re-engage in a credible and meaningful dialogue with the international community. And we call upon us, the international community, to stand ready. In the meantime, Sweden will stand united with the Council members in condemning any action that jeopardizes international peace and security. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank Her Excellency, Ms. Suter, for her statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Benedetto della Vedova, Undersecretary of State for Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation, Italy.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. President. I would like, first of all, to thank the Presidency for convening this timely meeting on such a key and pressing priority for the United Nations Security Council. I think that this body must deploy any possible effort to solve the crisis exacerbated by the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, persistent ambition to pursue its military nuclear program. Italy condemns in the strongest terms all the nuclear tests and ballistic missile launches carried out by the DPRK. Its nuclear and ballistic missile programs pose indeed a grave and increasing threat not only to the regional and international peace and security, but also to the global non-proliferation regime. We all share a common sense of urgency, since we rightly presume that, through its tests or launches, the DPRK is making advances in its military nuclear technology and capability. Such progress represents an exceptional level of threat for the international community. For this reason, Italy will continue to fully support the implementation of an effective sanctions regime as a tool to produce a change of behavior in the DPRK leadership. We are also ready to reinforce this sanctions regime in case of additional nuclear tests or, if necessary, to reach the objective of a peaceful and comprehensive solution of the issue. We strongly believe that a consistent and full implementation of the sanctions is the only way to make them effective in the framework of a comprehensive strategy for long-term peace and security. In this regard, let me recall what the panel of experts stated last February, that the implementation of the sanctions regime remains insufficient and highly inconsistent, while, I quote, all member states should reaffirm their commitment to rigorous enforcement of the United Nations sanctions. Sanctions must remain an instrument of a broader strategy, not an end in themselves. Such a regime requires member states' awareness and dedication in good faith. As chair of the 1718 Committee, Italy is committed to help all UN member states to fully implement the relevant UN Security Council resolution, and, in particular, Resolution 2270 and 2321. To this end, an open briefing was held in February, and since March we have been organizing a set of outreach meetings with UN regional groups in cooperation with the panel of experts. 2 meetings with Latin America and Eastern Europe have already taken place. the meeting with the African group will be held on the 1st of May, while those with WEOG and ASEAN group will take place at the end of by the end of May. As stated by Secretary Tillerson, our collective actions are not targeted against the North Korean population, but rather towards a regime that should put its population's interest and well-being above any other consideration of military power. The Security Council resolutions are clear in this respect, and as a chair of the Sanction Committee, we take great care in avoiding any unintended consequences for the civilian population in the country. Mr. President, Italy reaffirms the objective to achieve a diplomatic solution to North Korea's weapons of mass destruction threats. We are convinced that through its nuclear and missile programs, the DPRK will blatantly disregard its international obligations, does not serve its own security goal. On the contrary, we are convinced that the DPRK could much better meet its security needs by abiding by its international obligation under UN Security Council resolutions and its commitments under the joint statement of the six-party talks of September 2005. Furthermore, a few weeks from the commencement of the NPT next review cycle, Italy reiterates its demand to the DPRK return at an early date to the NPT and International Atomic Energy Agency safeguards. Finally, allow me to underline that the DPRK illegal nuclear and missile programs cause a deplorable diversion of crucial resources that should be devoted to the primary needs of the people of North Korea. We believe that the DPRK, by immediately repealing its nuclear and ballistic missile programs, would create the conditions for its reintegration in the international community and generate opportunities to improve its economy and the standard of living of its people. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Della Vedova for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Yoon Byung-se, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Korea. Sorry, excuse me. I now give the floor to the representative of the Ukraine for their statement.
Mr. President, North Korea's advancing nuclear and ballistic missile programs is extremely urgent nuclear proliferation challenge of our time, and therefore I thank the US Presidency and you personally for convening today's ministerial meeting on this highly topical issue. I also thank the Secretary General for his useful update. Ukraine unfailingly condemns in the strongest terms Pyongyang's continuous illegal activities in the pursuit of developing nuclear missile capabilities in gross violation of its international obligations. They have already seriously undermined the non-proliferation regime as a whole. The nuclear threat to the region is growing despite immense political and diplomatic efforts. Regrettably, we have seen no signs of DPRK's intention to change its behavior. What we have seen is the alarming persistence, not to say ever-growing obsession, of the North Korean leadership. As a result, the whole world faces a gloomy prospect of a large-scale military confrontation with unpredictable consequences. Mr. President, we all agree that existing challenges related to the DPRK nuclear and missile ambitions should be addressed collectively, decisively, and without any further delay. Apparently, the existing sanctions regime is not effective enough to prevent the DPRK from acquiring technologies, materials, equipment, and financial resources for the further development of its nuclear and missile programs. Sadly, we are witnessing steady evolution of North Korean tricks to evade sanctions. It had been proven many times, most recently by the pictures of military parade in Pyongyang with a whole range of new weaponry never seen before. We all know that the North Korean regime continues to build up its military arsenal at the expense of its own people. The impact of diverting resources has already produced a downward spiral of the steady deterioration of the quality of life for ordinary citizens. But does the regime care? Absolutely not. Mr. President, Ukraine's stance in this regard has been consistent. The Council should find ways to increase international pressure on the North Korean regime to respond to its reckless, unabated behavior. We do believe that only robust steps by the Council could put an end to the systematic and brutal violations of international law and eradicate the growing nuclear threat in Southeast Asia. We must not allow Pyongyang to continue discrediting the role of the Security Council in the context of global non-proliferation efforts. What could be the ways to effectively curb the North Korean nuclear threat? You clearly outlined them, sir, in your own statement. Undoubtedly, unconditional and faithful compliance with Security Council's resolutions is a key prerequisite to lower the level of the threat in the region and to prevent new provocations. Yet the Council may have to take additional robust measures with a view to compelling the DPRK to abandon its prohibited activities. That includes the development of nuclear weapons, ballistic missiles, and other types of weapons of mass destruction. We need to use every tool and avenue at the disposal of Council members to contribute to de-escalating the current highly volatile situation. Second, we fully share the necessity of further fostering neighboring states' defense capabilities against this threat. In this regard, I wish to reiterate that Ukraine stands firmly by the side of Japan, the Republic of Korea, and as well as other countries which are facing the growing nuclear threat. Third, it is high time to think what we can do to prevent any nuclear threat in the future in any part of the globe. Are we able to assess the whole range of real challenges to the non-proliferation regime to avoid the disaster in the future? The forthcoming non-proliferation treaty review cycle is a suitable platform for this. In this regard, Mr. President, I need to underscore the following. Disrespect for international law and attempts to undermine or change the established world order are becoming more systematic nowadays. The North Korean actions are a testament to this trend, but not the only one. Erosion of the existing system of international security, continuous breaches and unaddressed violations of international law pose a significant threat to the whole mankind. It is therefore the ultimate responsibility of the Security Council to spare no effort in order to restore respect for those norms, ensure fulfillment of international commitments and obligations, and prevent further violations. As a country that had voluntarily renounced its own nuclear arsenal and has been strictly abiding by its obligations related to non-proliferation of nuclear materials, technologies, and their means of delivery, we are convinced that a world without nuclear weapons should remain a real policy goal for all concerned parties and not a theoretical concept which is sneered at by some. If nuclear powers are serious about nuclear non-proliferation and eventual disarmament, they could strengthen global non-proliferation regime immensely by making nuclear disarmament a success story. Based on Ukraine's experience of confronting aggression from the nuclear state, this aspect is of particular importance to my own country. The brutal violation of the international obligations, including under the 1994 Budapest Memorandum, by the permanent member of this Council, who put its signature under the assurances of sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine, contravenes the whole UN-based security system created after World War II. The international community has collective responsibility to restore respect for international law and to find lasting solutions to the most urgent threats to global peace and security. The North Korea issue is a test case for all of us today. Our success in resolving it may open ways to address other pressing problems on the world stage. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Ukraine for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Uruguay.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Secretary of State, we thank you for taking part in this meeting and for presiding over this meeting. And we'd also like to thank the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, for his comments. Allow me to express our satisfaction over the fact that the Presidency of the Security Council has organized this open briefing, which is particularly important at a time when the tensions in the Korean Peninsula has reached unprecedented levels. Allow me to recall, Mr. President, that already last year our delegation had requested on more than one occasion the convening of an open briefing of the Security Council in order to deal with this matter, understanding that this type of session, this type of meeting could contribute in some way to raising the level of treatment within this organization of this particular item. I'm pleased that several months later, finally, the Council in an open session is dealing with this situation. Sir, Uruguay is a state that does not possess nuclear weapons. We are a member of the first nuclear weapon-free zone established by the Tlatelolco Treaty, and we are party to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. As a result, we are strongly committed to strengthening the disarmament and non-proliferation regime, and we have always advocated for a world free of nuclear weapons. Uruguay's foreign policy revolves around the basic principles of international law, among them the prohibition of the use of force in international relations, and also using peaceful means to settle disputes. The use and the threat of the use of nuclear weapons is a crime against humanity and a very serious violation of international law, including international humanitarian law, as well as, of course, the UN Charter. The only guarantee against the use and the threat of the use of these weapons is their express prohibition as well as their total elimination. Uruguay has expressed its vigorous condemnation of the nuclear tests as well as the ballistic missile launches carried out by the DPRK, and will continue to do so if the North Korean regime continues to defy and to disregard the provisions of the Security Council in persisting with its nuclear and ballistic missile program. The actions taken by this country can only increase the tensions in the Korean Peninsula. They are a violation of international law, of the resolutions of the Security Council, as well as a serious threat to international peace and security. As a result, Uruguay urges the DPRK to abandon its existing nuclear programs in a complete, verifiable, and irreversible manner, thus bringing an immediate end to all of the related activities, including launches with the use of a ballistic missile technology, as well as other acts of provocation. Similarly, we urge this country to return to the Non-Proliferation Treaty and to the International Atomic Energy Agency's safeguards regime. Uruguay has also held a position in this area which supports any initiative which would be aimed at dialogue, and that is why we believe that we should step up our efforts to restart talks in the Korean Peninsula, generating trust among the parties in order to bring the North Korean government back to the negotiating table and to begin serious negotiations on denuclearization. At a time of high tension, we must remain calm, avoid unilateral action, and focus on a solution to the problem. In this respect, we must recall paragraphs 47 and 48 of the last resolution adopted by the Security Council last November. That's Resolution 2231. In that resolution, the Security Council reaffirms its support for the six-party talks and asks that these talks resume, and refers to the objective of the verifiable denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula in a peaceful manner. Likewise, it reiterates the importance of maintaining peace and stability in the Korean Peninsula, as well as in Northeast Asia as a whole, and highlights the importance of working to reduce tension in the Korean Peninsula as well as outside of the peninsula. Uruguay has stressed the urgent need to bring to an end the vicious circle where the DPRK violates Security Council resolutions. The Council then imposes sanctions and issues communiques, and has reiterated that It's the responsibility of states that have sufficient leverage to develop new negotiating tracks in order to resolve this impasse. Uruguay sees no other solution to the North Korean question that does not include dialogue, negotiation, and political commitment. In this respect, Mr. President, my country reaffirms its desire to continue working within the Security Council with a view to finding a peaceful, diplomatic, and political solution to the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of Uruguay for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of France.
Mr.
President, Mr. Secretary General, I would like to thank the American presidency of the Security Council for having taken the initiative to have this important meeting. I would like to welcome, in particular, the President of the Secretary of State of the United States, Mr. Rex Tillerson. I also welcome the presence of the Secretary General of the United Nations. It is my honor to read to you this statement by the French Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Development, Mr. Jean-Marc Ayrault, who is detained by a European meeting and therefore could not be in New York today. And what follows is the text of his statement. Mr. President, Secretary General, France remains particularly concerned by the continued nuclear and ballistic programs in North Korea. They feed a serious rise in tensions in the Korean Peninsula and constitute today one of the main threats to international peace and security. By becoming engaged for several years now in a methodical effort which was initiated at the highest level of the regime to acquire operational nuclear arsenal, North Korea defied all of the interdictions of this council and the repeated demands of the entire international community to give up on that goal. We note today a constant and rapid progression in the development of proliferation programs of North Korea. And this brings them closer and closer to operational capacity. This is an unacceptable situation. France has condemned systematically and firmly each and every of the acts which led to this. It called upon North Korea at every opportunity to give up on the development of a nuclear weapon. And this appeal, I launch it again today. This headlong rush forward cannot continue. It feeds a dangerous and provocative spiral and represents an open challenge to the non-proliferation regime. And that's why we have to react to each new development, to recall the standard, the norm of non-proliferation, and to avoid sending a message of impunity to those states which could be tempted to continue to follow the suit of this irresponsible and provocative strategy. We are also concerned by the reemergence of chemical weapons in the region. The attack in Malaysia on the 13th of February should sound an alarm, especially given the global context of the resurgence of chemical weapons and the repeated and continued violations of the ban on this in Syria. We have to be lucid. The goal of North Korea is to become a nuclear weapon state and to upset the strategic equilibrium in the Far East and the world by directly threatening the security of every one of us. Tomorrow, any country could find itself within reach of North Korean missiles. And I would like everyone to understand the urgency of the matter. We have to collectively be able to rise to the level of our responsibilities as members of the Council and show our determination to fight these unjustifiable activities. Let's not forget that the development of nuclear and ballistic programs is at the price of sacrifice by the North Korean people, who are victims of serious human rights violations, and 70% of them live in situation of food insecurity. These violations, by their seriousness and their systematic nature, are an expression of absolute totalitarian nature, where things which are random systematically take precedence over rule of law. The world cannot be content with this situation because it tramples underfoot everything that we have tried to painstakingly create, in particular here at the United Nations. Given such a threat, the commitment of the international community and the Security Council has to be firm, has to be clear, has to be visible. Our goal can only be complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. The Council reacted energetically to the irresponsible activities of Pyongyang. It condemned the nuclear tests and put together a sanctions regime which is fast and consistent. This was reinforced at each test and twice in 2016 through resolutions 2270 and 2321. France contributed towards the adoption of these resolutions and welcomed them. As was done yesterday vis-à-vis Iran, sanctions obviously are not a goal in and of themselves. They are just a means of bringing North Korea to reason and making them accept the denuclearization of the peninsula. We can, however, but regret the uneven implementation of the sanctions. This seriously undermines the effectiveness of what the international community is doing. We call upon all states, without exception, to ensure that they are implemented rigorously and without reservation when it comes to the decision of the Security Council by all of the actors on their territory, as is required in the United Nations Charter. I understand that there may be technical and practical difficulties here. It is therefore up to the Council to continue extending assistance for those who need it. As North Korea continues proliferating and the danger that it presents to peace and security is growing, as this is happening, our position has to remain determined and unambiguous. To any other provocation from Pyongyang, the international community, and the Security Council, when this happens, we have to be ready to react to that through new measures. North Korea has to understand that continuing with their programs, new tests will have a serious cost, in particular through new sanctions, all the while trying to protect the population who are victimized by their leaders. But we cannot simply be acting in reaction to what North Korea does. We need to take an initiative to make sure that North Korea does not have operational nuclear weapons. The international community has to strengthen without delay in a joint and coordinated manner diplomatic and economic pressure on North Korea to make sure that ultimately they abandon their proliferation activity. The resumption of discussions is in order to find a negotiated solution. But dialogue can only continue provided that the DPRK participates in it in good faith and gives up on its nuclear goals. France, as far as we're concerned, is determined. We will be fully engaged as a permanent member of the Security Council, but also within the European Union to ensure that the United Nations and Europe draw consequences from this unacceptable threat to international peace and security. Thank you.
I thank the representative of France for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Bolivia.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Bolivia would like to thank the presidency for convening this meeting. We would also like to thank the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, for the report he has given us on this occasion. Bolivia would like to highlight the main purpose of the UN Charter with respect to taking collective measures which are effective to prevent and to eliminate threats or other breaches to peace and to eradicate acts of aggression and to achieve through peaceful means and in accordance with the principles of justice and international law and to settle disputes. The plurinational state of Bolivia, in compliance with its political constitution, reaffirms its condition as a pacifist state, rejecting any aggression as an instrument to resolve disputes, controversies, or conflicts between peoples and states. In that respect, the government of President Evo Morales established a policy to reject any kind of bellicose confrontation or of any other nature. Sir, with a view to avoiding bellicose confrontations, we see the need to move towards the priority of nuclear disarmament throughout the planet. Latin America and the Caribbean, my region, is a nuclear weapon-free zone, thanks to the signing of the Tlatelolco Treaty, which in 2017 is celebrating its 50th anniversary. And it's the first region that is free of nuclear weapons. Sir, in that respect, and following this same line of non-proliferation, we reiterate our firmest condemnation of the launching of ballistic missiles and the nuclear tests which were carried out by the DPRK. The last one took place on the 15th of April. This attitude is a threat to international peace and security. And in that respect, we call for the unity of the Security Council in order to tackle this situation. Compliance with the resolutions of this Council is crucial in order to comply with this objective. Likewise, we recall that sanctions are not an end in themselves, but rather a means in order to achieve an objective, as was recalled by the recent meeting of foreign ministers of the G77. Bolivia also rejects unilateral sanctions in this as well as in any other case. And for that reason, we think that the Security Council, through multilateral mechanisms, must take the necessary action. Sir, in recent weeks, the world has seen an escalation of tension, both due to the tests carried out by the DPRK as well as the military deployment of the United States. The current situation can be considered the greatest threat of nuclear war which has taken place in this century. We urge all of the parties involved to avoid the escalation of a rhetoric and actions which would increase tension and which would endanger international peace and security, especially in the Korean Peninsula. In that respect, we support the proposal of China to carry out an action to deactivate the crisis in the Korean Peninsula. The DPRK must abandon its nuclear test program as well as its ballistic missile program, and at the same time, the United States must avoid the use of military exercises in that region. It's necessary for the parties involved to restore negotiations. The six-party forum is the most appropriate forum for that, and is crucial as well for countries in the region to take part in negotiations with a positive spirit, and which would make it possible to diffuse current tension. The only solution to this conflict is a political solution. We must rule out once and for all any alternative which would be of a military nature. At the present time of tension, reason must prevail. We must avoid any position which could lead us to provocations and misunderstandings. We must place a priority on respect for dignity of peoples as well as the lives of those who live on our planet. Sir, war is the failure of this Council. War is the failure of policy. War is the failure of diplomacy. We have the obligation, the internationally recognized obligation, to negotiate. I reiterate, we have the internationally recognized obligation to negotiate. We must set aside warlike equations, because once we unleash the demons of war, the only ones who benefit are those who profit from it. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Bolivia for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Egypt.
Mr. President, allow me at the outset to thank the Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Antonio Guterres, for his valuable briefing before the Council today, especially his vision, which takes into consideration in a balanced manner all the dimensions of this issue under discussion today. Mr. President, the current situation on the Korean Peninsula is one of the major challenges to the nuclear non-proliferation treaty regime. Egypt is deeply concerned at the increasing tension following the recent developments, which has become one of the gravest threats to international peace and security. Egypt reiterates its full support for all efforts aimed at reaching a peaceful solution to the crisis of the DPRK nuclear program and achieving a sustainable peace on the Korean Peninsula, including all reunification efforts. Given the unique and historical ties between Egypt and the people of Northeast Asia, Egypt calls once again on the DPRK to comply fully with all of its international commitments under relevant Security Council resolutions, to eliminate its nuclear weapons and to rejoin the Non-proliferation Treaty as a non-nuclear state without delays or conditions. Egypt is committed to taking every necessary step at the national level to implement all Security Council sanctions related to the DPRK. Mr. President, Egypt calls on the international community and the Security Council to address all NPT challenges comprehensively and without selectivity or double standards. This is necessary if we are to preserve the credibility and effectiveness of the non-proliferation regime and relevant Council resolutions, including Resolution 687, especially in light of the continued erosion of the credibility of this regime, which is the cornerstone of the wider international security architecture. The continued erosion in the NPT credibility and effectiveness came to light when a certain number of states decided, and with no clear justification, to prevent the NPT review process from reaching any objective results by breaking the consensus reached by the majority of state parties. They did so in service of political agendas that run counter to state party obligations under the NPT and to the unified message that we should all send, namely that the international community is committed to achieving the universality of the treaty and is committed to dealing with all nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament challenges in a comprehensive and balanced manner without any selectivity. Mr. President, in closing, we encourage all parties to exercise self-restraint and to resume talks to reach a peaceful settlement as soon as possible. In this regard, we call on the DPRK to respond to the calls for the resumption of the talks and to cease any activities that would lead to further tension and escalation. We also urge all other international parties to provide the necessary conditions for an agreed settlement that would ensure regional and international peace and security in a manner consistent with the goals and principles of the UN and the NPT. Egypt stands ready to make every possible effort to support such a peaceful settlement to this crisis and maintain peace and security in the region and beyond. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Egypt for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Yoon Byung-se, Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Korea.
Mr. President, Secretary General Guterres, distinguished ministers and representatives, let me join others in thanking Secretary Tillerson for convening this very timely meeting and Secretary General Guterres for his comprehensive briefing. This ministerial meeting of the Security Council, the first ever on the denuclearization of North Korea, demonstrates the sense of gravity and urgency shared by all members of the international community. North Korea is now at the final stage of nuclear weaponization and claims to be a nuclear weapon state, as it has declared in its amended constitution. Since the first North Korean nuclear crisis a quarter century ago, North Korea has made huge advancements in all areas of its nuclear weapons and missile programs through 5 nuclear tests and numerous missile launches. We have witnessed, first, an exponential growth in its nuclear weapons capabilities from what used to be a few kilograms of plutonium back in 1992 to significant nuclear arsenal now. Second, a rapid development of ballistic missiles of all types and ranges that now threaten to reach every corner of the world. And finally, its willingness to actually use WMDs, as was manifested in the assassination of the North Korean leader's half-brother with a chemical weapon. In a nutshell, North Korea's WMD capability, coupled with the intent to actually use them, bring us ever so closer to the tipping point. It's no wonder that some experts say the world is facing its greatest nuclear emergency since the Cuban Missile Crisis. A nuclear-armed North Korea will significantly disrupt the security landscape in the Northeast Asia and the world. It will also deal a fatal blow to the global non-proliferation regime based on the NPT and increase the risk of North Korean nuclear material or related technology falling into the hands of terrorists. In order to avoid this nightmarish scenario, we must act now. We are racing against time. So what should be our response? Extraordinary circumstances require extraordinary responses. A pundit once said, quote, "Insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results," unquote. What we need is a new approach led by the Security Council, not allowing North Korea to dictate the agenda and timeline. Security Council resolutions 2270 and 2321 are milestone measures that illustrate such a new approach. Based on these most comprehensive and robust resolutions, the international community has built and solidified a united front against North Korea over the past year. For its part, my government also took a series of unilateral measures in line with the Council's efforts. We are seeing evidences that sanctions are biting by cutting off North Korea's hard currency income, deepening Pyongyang's diplomatic isolation, and blocking its illicit activities on all fronts. The international community must sustain efforts to thoroughly implement these resolutions. Moreover, the Security Council must discuss additional punitive measures to take against the future provocations proactively, not reactively, as was the case up until now. The Council has repeatedly warned that it will take further significant measures, including sanctions, in the case of future provocations. But Pyongyang may still harbor the illusion that the Security Council will only take limited action and that it can disregard and ridicule the authority of the United Nations. In order to change such strategic calculus of Pyongyang and induce changes from within, we could take potent measures such as halting the export and supply of crude oil to North Korea, completely cutting off North Korea's hard currency earnings by, for instance, suspending all imports of coal from North Korea, and seriously considering whether North Korea, a serial offender, is qualified as a member of the United Nations, as well as downgrading diplomatic relations with North Korea. Let me be clear. Our goal is not bring North Korea to its knees, but to bring it back to the negotiating table for genuine denuclearization. We must be clear-eyed about Pyongyang's intent. It's not interested in negotiating for denuclearization. Instead, its game plan is to be recognized as a nuclear weapon state and to negotiate nuclear disarmament as such. Just last week, the North Korean Deputy Permanent Representative to the United Nations himself made clear that any denuclearization talks are a non-starter. Under these circumstances, dialogue for the sake of dialogue cannot be an option. If history teaches us anything, it's that we must not repeat the tried and failed approach. Over the past 20-some years, we have left no stone unturned. Yet countless negotiations and agreements with this rule breaker par excellence have led us nowhere, but back to square one, due to North Korea's renege and deception. They have only bought time for the regime to advance its WMD capabilities. We must break this vicious cycle of provocations, negotiations, provocations, and of rewarding North Korea's bad behavior once and for all. Our goal is not to compromise on half measures for bogus peace. Our goal is the complete, verifiable, and irreversible dismantlement of the North Korean nuclear weapons and missile programs. Finally, in dealing with the North Korean nuclear issue, we must not lose sight of another serious threat emanating from North Korea's chemical and biological weapons programs. Security Council Resolution 2270 decided that North Korea should abandon all chemical and biological weapons and weapons-related programs. In this regard, I welcome the joint letter by Secretary General Guterres and Director General Woo Jung-chu of the OPCW, calling upon North Korea to accede to the CWC. Mr. President, history tells us how in the first half of the 20th century, the failure to counter Nazi ambitions led to the outbreak of the Second World War. If we do not respond to North Korea's repeated provocations in a resolute manner now, we'll only further feed the appetite of the trigger-happy regime in Pyongyang. In this regard, should North Korea conduct a sixth nuclear test or launch an ICBM, it will be a game changer for all of us. This is why it is critical that this time the entire international community continue to maintain the unprecedented unified front against North Korea. This is the last opportunity to break and reverse this process. The heavy responsibility is incumbent on all of us. With regard to the deployment of a THAAD battery system in my country, it is purely a defensive measure in the face of such existential threat from North Korea. It's not aiming at any third country. Furthermore, legitimate annual U.S.-South Korea military exercise is a defensive and transparent exercise. This cannot be put on a par with North Korea's breach of obligations under the UN Security Council resolutions. Mr. President, as this is my last appearance in the Security Council, I'd like to take this opportunity to express my deepest gratitude for the unflinching support members of the Security Council have rendered to me and my government over the past 4 years in confronting North Korea's nuclear and missile challenges. I assure you that the Republic of Korea will continue to be a stalwart partner in the Council's efforts to safeguard international peace and security. Thank you very much.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Yoon for his statement. I shall now make a further statement in my capacity as Secretary of State of the United States. First, I appreciate all of the statements that have been made by you, and I have received those statements in the constructive spirit in which I know they've been offered. I also want to acknowledge the presence of a large number of ambassadors with us today. Your presence gives strength to the importance of this issue and is a visible demonstration of the importance of this issue to the international community, and I welcome you and I appreciate you being here. As has been stressed repeatedly in many of your statements today, North Korea has failed to honor its commitments of the past. It is making promises which it has broken. Had this body fully enforced and stood behind resolutions it had enacted in the past, vigorously enforcing sanctions with full compliance, perhaps we would not have found ourselves confronted with the high level of tension that we're faced today. We will not negotiate our way back to the negotiating table with North Korea. We will not reward their violations of past resolutions. We will not reward their bad behavior with talks. We will only engage in talks with North Korea when they exhibit a good faith commitment to abiding by the Security Council resolutions and their past promises to end their nuclear programs. And that is why we must have full and complete compliance by every country to the resolutions that have been enacted by this body in the past. No relaxation in the vigorous implementation of sanctions. And we have called for those sanctions to be extended to other areas as well on a voluntary basis, and we're calling globally for all countries to participate in exerting pressure on North Korea. This is the way you make your voice heard, is through action. Any failure to take action diminishes your vote for these resolutions of the past, it diminishes your vote for future resolutions, and it devalues your seat at this council. We must have full, complete compliance by all members of the council. I thank you. I now resume my function as President of the Council. I believe there are no further speakers on the list. So with that, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.